Hi everyone, Jess from Sailing Popao here. I have been spearfishing for over about 15 years now, and in the last few we've seen a huge influx of women into the sport, which has been amazing. I've learned a few tips and tricks over the years that I want to share with you to make your spearfishing journey a little more enjoyable. What could be that different, you may ask? Well, the first and the most obvious one is going to be how to load a spear gun. On shorter spear guns, you're probably going to find it's not too hard to load it. Once you start stepping up to those bigger 120s, 130s, and even the blue water guns, you're going to have a lot of trouble trying to load them with the stock standard off-the-shelf setup. I have met a few ladies that have been more than capable to load these, but I am certainly not one of those. Either I lack the coordination or the strength, or a bit of both. But generally these guns are aimed for men, so they are a little bit stronger, a little bit harder to load. So the first thing that I changed on my 130 Euro setup was I went from 2 16mm rubbers, which is the standard setup, to 3 14mm rubbers. Basically, that is spreading the load out over 3 instead of the 2 rubbers, and individually it is so much easier to load those rubbers. Now, on a shorter gun you probably won't need the rest tab, but on the bigger guns like a 130, I've opted for a rest tab, which lets me load my rubbers in 2 stages. The tab breaks up the movement, so I load the rubber to the first tab on my hip, and then I bring the gun butt to my chest and load the last few inches there. So another option is to have a loading tab attached to the stock of your gun. I really like that option because it means you don't need to get custom spears every time you have to replace one. The only downside to this is it can be a little more awkward to load the rubbers, and also it's just one more thing to get snagged on your wetsuit, in the gun bag, or even worse, on your float line. With different body shapes, it can be helpful to try a number of setups to suit yourself. In cold water, where you need more weight to counter a thick wetsuit, a weight vest can be really helpful in addition to your main weight belt. This can also help alleviate back pain if you're finding you have some strain after a big day diving with a heavy weight belt. There's a number of rubber belts on the market now that do a pretty good job at holding your weight belt in place, much better than the traditional fabric belts. For me, I prefer a loose and low-fitting weight belt, and I actually use a crutch strap. Now, these can be made out of anything, and my current one is made out of some old hand spear rubber. It just loops between my legs and hooks onto my weight belt. That way, if I need to release my belt for any reason, it comes free with no issues. These straps are great, and they pretty much guarantee that your belt won't ride up as you dive. So a good set of fins are going to make or break your diving and recovery time. As a lot of this gear was made for bigger, stronger men, I opt for smaller and softer versions of carbon fins. My favourite fin, for example, is the Rife Carbon Dive-R, and they're a little bit shorter than the standard fin. After having used a number of Dive-R fins over the years, I found these to be my absolute favourite. Finally, my last tip is not really a gear setup, but something that most ladies and some men will have an issue with at some stage, and that is your hair. It can be an absolute nightmare, and I've thought about cutting it millions of times. But after years of trial and error, it's all come down to my favourite setup, which is a low ponytail which doesn't put pressure under my hood and doesn't get in the way of my GoPro strap. I then put multiple hair elastics down the length of my hair. This basically stops the whole thing turning into one gigantic knot. The best bit of advice I've ever received when it comes to hair care is keeping it trim. So if you're going to head off on a big coral sea dive trip or a week-long trip, get a really good haircut, because any of those split ends, that's what turns into dreadlocks. Finally, when you do get out of the water, make sure you rinse your hair with fresh water first before you start to detangle it. I would highly recommend getting a wet brush as well. These things are lifesavers, so when you do get a little bit of a knot, just brush it out with a bunch of conditioner and fresh water. There's nothing worse than hearing about people getting scared away from the sport by ill-fitting equipment they just can't use. There is something out there for everybody. If you have any more questions, please put them in the comments below and we'll see what we can do to help you out. Cheers.